Thank you, Sam. I'm truly honored to be speaking to all of you and to be part of this panel. I will first give you an update on what we are hearing about the situation on the ground, the human rights situation on the ground since the last Human Rights Council session in August. So what we have been hearing in early September and so far. Targeted killings, unfortunately, continue in Afghanistan. We saw a spike in targeted killings with the signing of US Taliban agreements. We see a continuation of targeted killings despite Taliban's almost full control of the country. And this recent series of targeted killings mostly target former national security forces. But we don't hear any follow-up in terms of arrests of those involved in targeted killings or any form of investigations. These target killings that are being reported from different parts of the country, for instance, we have reports from Nangarhar, we have reports from Ghor, we have reports, some reports from Herat. In all these cases, although mostly from what we see, they are mostly former security forces, sometimes ordinary citizens whose family members may have been members of security forces. They are creating an environment of fear for everyone, including, of course, for human rights defenders, women's rights activists, and journalists that are still in the country, most of them in hiding, most of them changing locations regularly, and especially because there doesn't seem to be an investigation or a follow-up or any form of accountability for these targeted killings or even any claims of responsibility. This intensifies the fears and continues to feed the culture of impunity and an environment of fear. There are also reports yet to be fully verified, but we have reports of extrajudicial killing of detainees. Even the conditions of the arrest are not often clear for how these, on the basis of what laws these people have been detained. And then, some of them, at least one case in Kunar, where the detainee was then killed in detention. There is, of course, the very worrying reinstitution of inhumane punishments and degrading of human dignity. As recent as 25th September, we heard about the hanging of bodies in Herat of alleged abductors who have been allegedly killed in exchange of fire with Taliban soldiers. And of course, this also again has led to a lot of anxiety and fear, but also a fear about reinstitution of these forms of punishments, including, for instance, stoning that was previously conducted under the Taliban. Of course, a Taliban official has also spoken about resumption of executions and amputations. And in the context of Afghanistan, where we have seen these things happen, not only when Taliban were ruling the country, but also in areas controlled by them in the past 20 years. This is extremely worrying. There seems to be no due process or access to free trial with a lot of these quote unquote punishments that are happening and the arrests that are happening. There are severe restrictions on freedom of expressions. You all heard in early September about journalists in Kabul being beaten up, tortured. Journalists are illegally detained. After this incident, after 2 journalists were beaten up and tortured in Kabul, Taliban promised investigations and accountability. There has been no announcements on what investigations have amounted to or who has been held accountable. And we see a lot more self-censorship. Afghan media, or in the whole region, one of the most free and independent media in the region. And we have just seen in the space of a little over a month that freedom being severely restricted. The restrictions on women's rights, of course, are the most widespread, severe and universal. It has been more than a week since so girls have been literally banned from secondary education, from high school and from universities, public universities. There are restrictions imposed on women's employment, female employees of many institutions, all institutions, but Ministry of Health at this point, and partly Ministry of Education have been told to stay home. Unclear when they would be able to resume their work, and if they would be able to resume their work in the same positions that they held before. For instance, it took a lot of hard work for women to get to middle management positions in ministries of finance and commerce and many of these sectors. Women who work for these institutions are now uncertain about what's next for them. They don't have any clarity. And of course, there is a continuous attempt to completely erase women from the public space, women's photos, women's presence, women's participation, and in the public and political sphere. It's a very systematic attempt to confine women to their homes, and a lot of very vague promises that with no delivery. There are also reports, very varying reports of enforced displacements with a very specific ethnic dimension. The latest is enforced displacements of ethnic Hazaras from several villages. It's in this environment of ongoing violations. There's also the fact that the laws and the delivery of justice has been suspended. Women victims of violence and abuse have to basically live with that violence and abuse because there is nowhere they can go to, and they fear punishment if they try to register complaints or go to courts. Prosecutors and judges are mostly in hiding. The Commission has not been able to monitor the situation due to concerns for the safety of our staff. Our offices have been taken over, and the Commission's independence has not been recognized by the Taliban to allow us to continue to operate and deliver services and work with female victims of domestic abuse, child victims of abuse, register complaints, follow-up complaints, monitor places of detention, and monitor and document human rights abuses. So a whole range of key human rights activities by a national human rights institution is currently suspended. While we have had updates from the High Commissioner to the Human Rights Council, we haven't seen any detailed reports or press statements on abuses and allegations of abuses by UNAMA since Taliban's takeover of Kabul. So while they may continue doing some documentation, we as members of the public are really not aware of to what extent that documentation is happening and what deterrent impact could it have. So it's in this environment that we have repeatedly, even before Taliban takeover of Afghanistan, we had asked for a fact-finding mission, for a well-resourced investigative and monitoring mechanism to document the human rights abuses and violations in Afghanistan and violations of international humanitarian law. Since we made that call in May, the situation for human rights in Afghanistan has gotten far worse. The ability of national institutions and independent media severely limited. And so if anything, we need a stronger mechanism. I am encouraged that there has been a serious discussion among member states about a mechanism in this Human Rights Council session about a mechanism for Afghanistan. However, I just want to reiterate that doing just something is not good enough. It has to be a well-resourced mechanism. It has to be able to make carry out meaningful work, investigative work, and monitoring. It has to have the ability to communicate to Taliban that it is able to watch and document, and it should have, so that it can have some deterrent impact, but also can create some hope for accountability. This is a really hopeless moment for Afghanistan. And as a human rights defender and talking to human rights community in Afghanistan, many of our colleagues now in exile from the broader human rights movement in Afghanistan, but despite this hopelessness, we know this is not the end of the journey for human rights in Afghanistan. Right now, at this moment of transition and uncertainty and darkness, we just need the member states to step in and to support a well-resourced mechanism and document what's going on. And we are working to regroup. We are working to do what we can, but we can't do it on our own. Thank you.
Thank you.